Welcome back. This is Mr. Albertson. These are our notes for U.S. History 2 at Granite Connection High School. This is Late Colonial Society, number 4. So let's rock in. So first of all, oh wow, these notes got messed up a little bit. So the key point here is that family size starts to get smaller because farms are getting split up among all the children. So as you have large families, you got to give each son at least a piece of the farm, and that means that your farm, your total farm, gets smaller and smaller because every boy gets a piece. So families start to get smaller because they can't afford to have as many kids. Also, we see that trade is increasing. Not only are slaves coming into the area, but all kinds of things are being shipped out: rum, lumber, fish, tobacco, obviously. And then we see that in the lives of women, which is always something I like to make sure we don't ignore, in the lives of women, we see that early in the colonial period, women are spending almost all their time bearing children. They're having a lot of pregnancies, and therefore, I'm just trying to find my pen here. They're having a lot of children, and so they're spending most of their years, their adult years, either pregnant or nursing or raising children. But as family size starts to shrink, as family size starts to shrink, women start to produce things out of the home. And this brings slowly, but it starts to bring in cash money to women directly, and then it helps them gain more status within their families. One of the big changes in this time is really religion. We see immigrants coming in, not just from England now, but we start seeing immigrants from the Netherlands, call them Dutch people, also from Germany. And they belong to different churches. They're not Puritans and they're not Anglicans. They're not members of the Church of England. They are members of different churches. And we see that some of them are Lutheran, like the Germans. Some of them are Presbyterians. And so we start to see a lot more of a mix of different kinds of religion in the colonies. Also, we see Irish immigrants coming in. And the Irish immigrants are at this time mostly Catholic. So now instead of just Puritans and just Anglicans, we have Lutherans, Presbyterians, Catholics all mixed in. And we see the Enlightenment, which is a focus on science and reason in the 17 and 1800s. The Enlightenment starts to really put a new spin on religion, and we call that deism. Deism is the idea that there is a God and that God created the universe, but God doesn't really affect things. There are no miracles. The Bible's probably not real. God doesn't affect our lives. So famous deists are people like Benjamin Franklin, for example. And you see references to this frequently in colonial documents where people would talk about, we believe that God created the universe, or we hold these truths before God, but they're not necessarily talking about the God of the Bible. Sometimes they are, but they're not always. Sometimes they're talking about this other God who merely created the universe and essentially walked away. And so it's not always clear how religious these statements are meant to be. Sometimes they're kind of not religious. Sometimes when Thomas Paine, he talks about that God will be the king, he actually means that the people will be the king because he doesn't really believe in a God. Or at least not a God that matters. Oh, let me scroll up a little bit. But even while some people are rejecting religion and moving toward a kind of almost an atheism, not quite an atheism, a deism, at the same time, we're seeing a new revival of religion in other parts of the colonies. And this new revival of religion is called the Great Awakening, a return to religion. And here we see a new form of Christianity. We call this the Baptist denomination. And also a focus on millennial movements. Millennial just means a belief in the end of time, that the end of time is coming, the apocalypse is coming. Something that a lot of people today can relate to. People now have a sense of, kind of a fascination with the end of the world. So they also would have shared that. They had a view that the end of the world was coming soon. And the Baptists had some key features, and you can see these in modern Christianity as well. So these are pretty important to understanding today's modern Christianity. First, emotional preaching. So instead of reading a sermon from the pulpit or reading a liturgy like a priest would do, these preachers are getting up and making exciting, interesting sermons. People are getting out of their seats, they're clapping, they're excited, it's fun. Also, there's a focus on your personal relationship to God. Not so much what you do in church, but your personal relationship to God. We call that piety. Also, these preachers are moving from town to town. They're not professional preachers. They don't work for a church. They're often farmers and they just go around and they're amateurs and they give sermons wherever people will have them. They often would set up tents for these revival meetings, and they began to really challenge the tax, by here state, here we mean tax support of the Congregationalists. These are the Puritans. Puritans are also called Congregationalists. So the government at the time was paying tax money to support the Puritans and the Church of England, the Anglicans. So the Puritans were up in Massachusetts and New England, and the Anglicans are down in Virginia and other places. So in different colonies, it was different churches, but the main church in each colony was supported by tax money. And these Baptist revivals say, well, why are we paying taxes to support this religion that we don't belong to? And the last key point is that Baptists not only focus on converting lower class whites, but Baptists also put a focus on converting the slaves, something that the Anglicans and the Puritans had never got around to doing. They had not thought it was important. Remember that the Puritans believed that people were chosen to be saved or chosen to not be saved. And they just naturally, in their racist view of the world, they naturally assumed that Africans would never be saved, that no Africans were chosen for heaven. And so there was no need to try to convert them because probably God didn't want them anyway. The Baptists didn't have this view. The Baptists believed that you could choose to be saved, you could choose to be converted, and therefore slaves could choose to be converted the same as white people could choose to be converted. So Baptists focus on converting anyone they can, particularly including slaves. And once slaves start to become Christian, this leads ultimately to the view that you shouldn't treat Christians like slaves, and it ultimately starts to undermine the whole institution of slavery. That's it for these notes. Thank you very much.